Hey, welcome back. So we're picking up where we left off by talking about cursors. And more importantly, we're going to see how we can move the cursor around. So we hit the end of the file last time and we tried to read again. We couldn't get anything. We're at the end of the file. So I'm going to show you how to move the cursor to the beginning or the middle or wherever you want. And I'm going to show you a couple of other additional, probably more helpful methods. But the first thing I'll show is a method called seek. So seek is how we can manipulate the position of the cursor, how we can reset it to the beginning or the 10th character, whatever we want. So we'll do the same, file equals open. I'm going to call it file instead of F. It's a little bit better. Story.txt. I haven't changed the story, so file.read. We get the same thing. I read again. We're at the end, so I don't get anything. But I'm now going to update the file. 1 second. There we go. This short story is really short. Now it's a little longer. The end. Let me delete this line at the end. Okay, now if I save this file, I'm using this as an opportunity to show you the behavior here. File itself doesn't really look like anything's changed, but this is interesting and somewhat counterintuitive to how a lot of people think that files work, and how when you read in a file, a lot of people think that it's a one-time thing. You don't actually have to open the file again to get the new changes. There's a connection that's open between Python and the story.txt file. It's like a little tube. And so a change just occurred. The cursor is at the same spot. So I said the cursor was at the end of the file, which is true, or it was true. But let's say wherever that was, right, where was it? We were like right here. That was the end of the file. But now we added these other lines and the cursor is still here in Python. So it's not like a Sublime thing. The Python cursor is here. And we just added this text and saved. So now if I read again, it's just going to read from there forward down to here. So if I do that, file.read, we get, ow, it's a little longer, the end. I think, what did I do? I think the cursor was here. There was a new line character. But the point here is that I made the file, I opened it, then I made a change, and I didn't have to reopen it. I just read it again, and you can see there's this pipeline between us, between the file and Python. Okay, so seek allows me to do things like, right now I'm at the very end of the file. If I did file.read again, or file.read, if I call seek and seek 0, we'll move the cursor to the beginning. So now if I do file.read, I get the entire story. If I do, so file.read again, cursor's at the end, so I can do seek, and I can pass in a number, like 1, which will take me to the first index, the first character. And if I do a file.read, we should get his short story, just like that. And now we're at the very end again, so file.read, once again, is empty. So I could seek to the 50th character and do a file.read, and this is all that was left. Okay, so that was seek. Next, I'm going to show you another method. This one is called readLine. So I'm going to reset this file. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Okay, so my cursor's at the beginning, and if I did a file.read, it gives me the entire file. But oftentimes, let's say we're working with, I don't know, 100,000, well, that might be a bit much, 20,000 lines in a file. We could read it all at once, but other times you want things in chunks or maybe just a single line at a time. So we can do that with file.readLine, like this. And this will basically read the first line. It stops when it hits the new line character right here. And so that's what we get, the first line. And now if I did a file.read, my cursor has been moved to the second line, the beginning of the second line. So we get those second 2 lines. And I could reset it, do file.readLine, and I can read another line. Now my cursor is at the beginning of the third line. So I read another line, and we get the last line. And I do file.readLine one more time, and we're done. And the last method I'll show you is called readLines. And if we just look at file, actually let's do help of file. And I'll scroll through, I'll fast forward through this. Here we are, readLines. It returns a list of lines. So unlike read, which just gives you everything, and readLine, which gives you one line at a time, readLines gives you all the lines, but it preserves them as separate lines instead of one giant string, and it puts them in a list. Okay, So if we try that, if we do a file.seek back to the beginning, and now I do file.read lines, I get this list, and it preserves those lines. So each one of these would be like running file.read line. And you guessed it, my cursor is at the very end. So it moves us all the way through. It just happens to put them all inside of a list. Okay, so at this point, we've seen how to read individual lines, read all lines, and move the cursor around. And we've also seen that until I manually close the file, any changes that I make in here, whatever I do, if I save and I do a file.read again, those changes are in there. So this connection is open. So it's important for us to actually close files. So it seems like, anything else in Python, we make a variable or a list. If we're done using it, we don't have to close it or do anything to it. Python just takes care of it. But with these files, it's actually important that we manually close them. Basically, just so we don't use up system resources. So the way we do it is using the file close method. So we just call close, and you can also check if a file is closed or not using the closed attribute. And I should mention, once you do close a file, it can't be read again until you reopen it. Basically start the whole process over. So let's go back here, and we're at the end. It doesn't really matter. But let's say I'm done. I've imported the contents of the file, and now I'm ready to do something with them, and I'm not going to write to the file. Then we should do a file.close. And before that, let me just run file.closed. You can see the property is false. But now if I file.close method, if I look at file.closed now, it is true. So if I try and do a read, we get this error, value error, IO operation on closed file. You can't do that. Same thing if I try and seek or any of the other things I've shown you so far. So we want to close that file, and if we needed the data back, we messed up, and I need that story.txt, I just reopen it. Okay, so to recap, we saw how to open a file, we saw how to read it, we talked about cursors, we saw how to use seek to move the cursor, usually back to the beginning. We saw how to use read line to get an individual line, and read lines to get all lines in a list. And then also we saw how to close a file. And that's important. You need to always close those files. Whenever you're done, close it. Okay, moving on, we're now going to talk about in the next video an alternate syntax that most people prefer for working with files.